The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was glowing under soft golden lights. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, reflecting tiny sparkles across the polished marble floor. A large black grand piano stood proudly in the center of the room, shining like it was waiting for its moment. Guests dressed in expensive suits and elegant gowns filled the hall. The air carried the scent of fresh flowers and strong coffee. Quiet conversations blended with soft laughter as everyone waited for the evening's main attraction. He was known around the world as a brilliant pianist. People spoke about his concerts in famous cities, about the awards he had won, and about the way his fingers could move across the keys like flowing water. He had built a reputation not only for his talent but also for his confidence. Some called it charm. Others quietly called it pride. That night, he was the special guest invited to perform for the hotel's private event. The audience expected magic, and he enjoyed being the one to give it to them. Before the performance began, he stood near the piano, greeting important guests. Cameras flashed. People shook his hand and praised his work. He smiled easily, clearly comfortable with the attention. He had played in much bigger halls than this, but he still enjoyed the admiration in smaller, intimate settings. It made him feel powerful. Near the back of the room, standing quietly beside one of the tall pillars, was a simple woman. She was not dressed like the other guests. Her clothes were neat but plain. She worked nearby at a small cafe inside the hotel building. She had finished her shift but stayed behind for a few minutes when she heard that a famous musician would be playing. Music had always been something special to her, something that made long days feel lighter. She did not want to disturb anyone. She only wanted to listen. She kept her hands folded in front of her and watched the room carefully. She noticed how everyone gathered closer to the piano, how they spoke about music using big words. She felt slightly out of place, but she stayed. The sound of a piano warming up had always felt like home to her. When the event host finally stepped forward to introduce the pianist, the room grew quiet. Applause filled the space as he took his seat at the piano. He adjusted the bench slightly and placed his fingers gently on the keys. Then he began to play. The first notes were soft and smooth. The melody floated across the room like a gentle breeze. Conversations stopped completely. Every head turned toward him. His hands moved quickly and confidently. The music rose and fell with perfect control. People closed their eyes, fully captured by the performance. The simple woman felt something stir inside her chest. The piece he was playing was one she recognized. It was not easy. It required strong control and deep emotion. She listened carefully, noticing small details, small changes in tempo. Without realizing it, her fingers moved slightly in the air, following the rhythm. After finishing the piece, the room exploded into applause. Some guests even stood up to clap. He bowed slightly, enjoying the praise. The host returned to the stage and spoke about his achievements again. There was laughter, light conversation, and another round of applause. That was when his eyes wandered around the room and landed on the simple woman near the pillar. He noticed that she was not clapping loudly like the others. Instead, she seemed thoughtful, almost focused. For a brief second, he felt curious. Then a playful idea crossed his mind. He leaned toward the microphone and smiled. In a confident tone, he said that music should be shared, that anyone could try if they wished. Some guests laughed softly. He then looked directly toward the back and gestured toward the woman. "Why don't you come and play a few notes for us?" he said lightly. The room turned to look at her. A few people chuckled, assuming it was harmless fun. She froze. Her heart began beating faster. She did not expect to be noticed, let alone invited to the stage. For a moment, she wondered if she had misunderstood. The host also laughed, thinking it was part of the entertainment. The pianist repeated the invitation, this time with a slightly teasing tone. He assured everyone it would be fun, that perhaps there was hidden talent in the room. The simple woman felt heat rise to her face. She was not used to attention like this. She shook her head slightly at first, trying to decline politely. But the crowd began clapping and encouraging her to go forward. Some were smiling kindly. Others seemed amused. Inside, she felt two emotions fighting each other. One part of her wanted to disappear and return to the safety of the cafe kitchen. The other part remembered the small upright piano that used to stand in her childhood home. It was old and slightly out of tune, but she had spent hours sitting in front of it when she was younger. Music had once been her biggest dream. Life, however, had taken her on a different path. The pianist leaned back in his seat, clearly expecting her to refuse or perhaps press a few random keys for a laugh. He did not think much of it. To him, it was a light moment, something to make the evening more relaxed. But as the applause continued, she slowly stepped away from the pillar. Each step toward the center of the room felt heavy. She could hear whispers around her. She kept her eyes down and walked carefully, aware of every gaze following her. The bright lights near the piano felt warmer than the rest of the room. When she reached the stage area, she paused. She looked at the pianist briefly. His expression held a small smile, the kind that suggests confidence mixed with curiosity. He stood up slightly to offer her the seat, still believing this was only a playful break in the program. She nodded politely and sat down at the piano bench. Up close, the grand piano looked even more beautiful. The smooth surface reflected her nervous face. She placed her hands gently in her lap and took a slow breath. The room became quieter than before. People leaned forward in their seats, waiting. The pianist stepped aside, crossing his arms loosely. He wanted to see what would happen. In his mind, the worst case would simply be a few wrong notes and some laughter before he returned to playing. She lifted her hands slowly and hovered them above the keys. For a second, she closed her eyes. The ballroom felt completely still, as if even the chandeliers were waiting. And just before her fingers touched the piano, the night shifted in a way no one expected. Her fingers finally touched the keys. The first note was soft. So soft that a few people in the back wondered if she had pressed it by accident. But then another note followed. And then another. The sound was steady, calm, controlled. The famous pianist, who had been standing with his arms crossed, slowly uncrossed them. She was not randomly pressing keys. She was beginning a melody. Started simple, almost fragile, like someone testing the water before stepping in. The notes were spaced gently, each one given room to breathe. The audience leaned closer without realizing it. A quiet tension filled the air. No one laughed now. Her hands stopped trembling. As the melody continued, her fingers began moving with more confidence. The soft beginning slowly grew into something fuller. The tone changed. It became richer, deeper, carrying emotion that could not be faked. The pianist's smile faded. He recognized the structure. She was not playing something easy. She was building into a classical piece that required timing and skill. Not the kind of piece someone casually learns from watching online videos. This was something that took years of practice. A few guests exchanged confused glances. One man who had earlier been whispering jokes about the situation straightened in his chair. A woman near the front slowly lowered her glass, afraid to make any sound. The simple woman did not look at the audience. She looked only at the keys. But her face had changed. The nervousness from earlier was gone. In its place was focus. Deep focus. Her left hand moved smoothly across the lower keys, holding a steady rhythm. Her right hand danced across the higher notes, weaving a melody that felt alive. The sound filled the ballroom in a way that felt warm and real. The room, which earlier felt grand and decorated, now felt small compared to the music. The famous pianist took a step closer to the piano, as if he needed to see this from a better angle. He watched her hands carefully. There were no mistakes, no hesitation. She shifted into a stronger section of the piece. The tempo increased slightly. Her fingers moved faster now, but still clean, still precise. Each note landed exactly where it should. Someone near the back whispered, "Is she trained?" No one answered. The melody rose higher, then dipped low again, like waves moving across the sea. There was emotion in it. Not showy emotion meant to impress. Felt personal, honest. The pianist's expression changed again, this time to something closer to disbelief. He realized something uncomfortable. This was no prank anymore. The audience could feel it too. The energy in the room shifted completely. What had started as a light joke now felt serious, important. She transitioned into the next movement smoothly, without pause. It was a difficult change. One wrong note would have broken the flow. But she did not miss. Her back straightened slightly. Her shoulders relaxed. She looked like someone who belonged there. A memory passed through her mind as she played. A small living room from years ago. An old piano pushed against a faded wall. The sound of rain tapping against windows. She remembered sitting alone for hours after school, repeating the same sections again and again until her fingers hurt. She remembered her mother standing nearby, listening quietly while cooking dinner. Those days felt distant now, but the music had never left her. Life had not allowed her to continue formal lessons. Money had been tight. Responsibilities had come early. Dreams had been placed aside for practical needs. But she had never truly stopped playing. Whenever she found a quiet moment, she would sit at any piano she could find. In community centers, in empty churches, sometimes even in the hotel ballroom when no one was around. She had learned to play not for applause, but for peace. Back in the present moment, the music swelled into its most powerful section yet. Her fingers moved rapidly, crossing over each other with ease. The sound was bold now, confident. It echoed against the high ceilings and bounced off the marble floors. It did not sound like someone trying to prove something. It sounded like someone telling a story. The famous pianist felt a strange tightness in his chest. It was not anger. It was not jealousy. It was realization. He had expected laughter. He had expected awkward silence. Instead, he was witnessing something pure. The audience, who had once looked at her with amusement, now looked at her with respect. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed admiration. A few even looked slightly embarrassed for having assumed she would fail. The final section approached. The music softened again, returning to the gentle tone from the beginning. But this time it carried more weight. It felt complete, like a circle closing. Her fingers slowed gradually. The notes became lighter, softer. Then, with one final delicate chord, she ended the piece. Silence. Complete silence. It lasted only a few seconds, but it felt longer. No one moved. The famous pianist stared at her hands still resting on the keys. Then someone in the front row began clapping. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. It broke the stillness. Another person joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire ballroom erupted into applause. It was louder than before. Not polite applause. Real applause. Several guests stood to their feet. The sound echoed against the walls just like the music had moments earlier. The simple woman slowly lifted her hands from the piano. She looked around, confused at first, as if unsure whether the reaction was truly for her. The famous pianist stepped forward. For a brief second, it seemed like he might speak immediately. But he did not. He looked at her with a different expression now. There was no teasing smile, no playful pride, only respect. He extended his hand toward her. She hesitated, then shook it. The applause continued. In that moment, something important had changed in the room. It was no longer about status or titles. It was no longer about fame or reputation. It was about music. And the simple woman who had walked in quietly after her shift had just reminded everyone of that. As the clapping slowly began to settle, whispers filled the space once again. But this time they were different. People were asking who she was, where she had studied, why they had never heard of her before. The famous pianist finally reached for the microphone. The room grew quiet once more, but what he was about to say would surprise them almost as much as the music had. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the room did not. The famous pianist stood still for a moment, holding the microphone in his hand. He looked at the woman beside the piano, then out at the audience. His expression was serious now, very different from the playful smile he had worn earlier. He cleared his throat softly. "I think," he began, his voice calmer than before, "we were just given a reminder." The room stayed silent. He turned slightly toward her. That was not simple playing, he said honestly. That was years of dedication. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. No one expected him to speak like that. The woman lowered her eyes. She was not used to standing in front of so many people. The bright lights felt stronger now, and the applause still echoed in her ears. She felt proud but also exposed. She had only meant to play a little. She never imagined it would become something this big. The pianist continued speaking. "May I ask," he said gently, "where did you learn to play like that?" All eyes turned to her again. She hesitated before answering. Her voice was soft but steady. "I started when I was very young," she said. "My mother found an old piano. It was not perfect, but it worked. I practiced every day after school." Someone near the front leaned forward, listening closely. "I had a teacher for a short time," she continued, "but after a while I had to stop lessons. We could not afford them anymore, so I kept learning on my own." The audience grew even quieter. She was not telling her story dramatically. She spoke in a simple way, as if she were explaining an ordinary part of life. But there was something powerful in her honesty. "I never stopped loving music," she added. "Even when life became busy." The pianist nodded slowly. He could hear the truth in her voice. There was no exaggeration, no attempt to impress, just facts. "And you work here?" he asked. She gave a small smile. "At the cafe inside the building," she replied. A few guests exchanged surprised looks. They had likely passed her before without noticing. The pianist turned back to the audience. "Talent," he said, "does not always sit in the front row." A soft wave of understanding passed through the room. He looked at her again, this time with curiosity instead of judgment. "Would you be willing," he asked carefully, "to play something else?" The question hung in the air. This time it did not feel like a prank. Felt like an invitation. She paused. Her heart beat faster again, but not from fear, from possibility. She nodded. The audience reacted with quiet excitement. Some leaned forward again in their chairs. The host stepped aside, sensing that something special was unfolding. She returned to the bench. The pianist did not step far away this time. Instead, he remained nearby, watching closely, not as someone waiting for a mistake, but as someone wanting to learn. She placed her fingers on the keys once more. This time, she did not begin with a known classical piece. She began with something of her own. The first notes were soft and reflective. The melody felt different from before. It was slower, more personal. It did not follow the strict structure of traditional music. It flowed freely. The sound carried emotion that words could not easily describe. It felt like early mornings before sunrise, like quiet streets after rain, like sitting alone with memories that are both sweet and painful. The audience listened carefully. Some closed their eyes again, but this time not out of politeness. They were trying to feel every note. The pianist noticed something special in her playing. She was not trying to show technical skill. She was telling a story through sound. Each pause felt intentional. Each rise and fall carried meaning. He realized that her strength was not only in practice. It was in feeling. As the melody grew stronger, her left hand added deeper tones, giving the piece more weight. Her right hand moved smoothly, almost gently, as if it were guiding the listener through a journey. The room felt different now, warmer, closer. People who had arrived earlier to enjoy a performance were now witnessing something real. The music built slowly toward a powerful center, not loud in a dramatic way, but strong in emotion, felt honest. The pianist felt a quiet sense of humility settle over him. He thought about the many years he had spent performing in large concert halls, the standing ovations, the interviews, the praise. He had worked hard for it all. But somewhere along the way, he had begun to enjoy the applause more than the music itself. Watching her play reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. Why he started. She played the final part of her piece with gentle control. The melody softened, almost like a goodbye. Then it ended in a quiet, lingering note that seemed to hang in the air even after her fingers lifted. Again, silence filled the ballroom. But this time it was not surprise. It was reflection. The applause that followed was slower at first, almost thoughtful. Then it grew stronger, fuller. Many people stood once more. The pianist stepped forward without waiting. "That," he said into the microphone, "was beautiful." He turned to her. "You did not just play music. You shared something personal." She looked slightly overwhelmed by the attention. "I only played what I feel," she replied quietly. He nodded. "That is what makes it powerful." The host approached carefully, sensing that the planned program for the evening had completely changed. But no one seemed upset. In fact, the atmosphere felt more alive than before. One of the hotel managers moved closer to the stage. There was curiosity on his face. The pianist looked at the audience again. "I believe," he said slowly, "we have all learned something tonight." A few guests smiled knowingly. He continued, "Sometimes we assume too quickly. Sometimes we think talent must come with titles or fame. But tonight proved that passion can grow anywhere." The simple woman stood quietly beside him, unsure what would happen next. The manager finally spoke up from near the stage. "Would you consider performing here again?" he asked her directly. The question surprised her. She blinked. "Perform?" she repeated. "Yes," the manager said. "Not as a guest from the crowd. As part of the program." A quiet excitement spread through the audience again. She looked at the pianist, almost asking for guidance without speaking. He gave a small, encouraging nod. "You deserve to be heard," he said. Her heart raced. She had never imagined something like this. She had played in empty rooms in small gatherings, for herself. But not like this. She took a deep breath. "I would be honored," she said softly. The applause returned once more. But inside her, something even stronger was growing. Not pride, not revenge, confidence. And for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe the dream she once placed aside had not disappeared after all. The evening that was meant to highlight one performer had quietly turned into something much bigger. Guests who had arrived expecting a polished, predictable concert now found themselves talking about the woman from the cafe. Small groups formed around the ballroom, discussing what they had just witnessed. Some spoke about her technique. Others spoke about the emotion in her music. But almost everyone agreed on one thing: they had misjudged her. The famous pianist remained near the piano longer than planned. He was used to being the center of attention, but tonight he felt different. He watched her step down from the stage area and stand near the side, unsure of where she should go next. The spotlight no longer shone directly on her, yet people kept approaching her with quiet words of praise. She accepted each compliment politely. She smiled gently, but she did not know how to fully respond. Praise felt unfamiliar in such large amounts. For years, her music had lived in private corners. Early mornings before work, late nights after long shifts, empty halls where no one listened except the walls. Now strangers were thanking her. The hotel manager approached her again, this time more formally. He explained that the hotel often hosted music evenings, private dinners, and special events. They usually invited professionals from outside. But perhaps, he suggested carefully, they could offer her a regular spot. She listened closely. The offer felt unreal. A part of her feared that the moment would fade like a dream once the night ended. She did not want to believe too quickly. "Think about it," the manager said kindly. "There is no pressure. But tonight showed us something important." She nodded, still processing everything. Across the room, the famous pianist was speaking quietly with the host. His expression was thoughtful. He replayed the evening in his mind. The joke, the invitation, the first notes, the silence that followed her performance. He felt a mixture of emotions. Pride had been replaced with reflection. After a few minutes, he walked toward her. She noticed him approaching and straightened slightly, unsure what he might say next. "I owe you an apology," he said calmly. She blinked in surprise. "An apology?" "Yes," he replied. "When I invited you to play, I did not expect what happened. I treated it like entertainment." She shook her head gently. "It is all right," she said. "I understand. It was meant to be light. But it was not fair, he continued. I should not have assumed. There was sincerity in his voice. She studied his expression and realized that he truly meant it. There was no pride left in his tone. I am glad you invited me, she said honestly. I would not have played otherwise. He smiled slightly. Then perhaps we both learned something. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. The noise of the ballroom continued around them, but it felt distant. I meant what I said earlier, he added. You have real ability. Have you ever considered returning to formal training? She looked down at her hands. Life became busy, she answered simply. There were responsibilities. He nodded. He understood that answer more than she realized. Success often hides the struggles that came before it. I know a few people, he said carefully. Teachers, musicians. If you ever decide to continue seriously, I could make introductions. Her eyes widened slightly. Why would you do that? Because talent deserves opportunity, he replied. For the first time that night, emotion touched her face more deeply. Not from applause. Not from surprise. From hope. Meanwhile, several guests were already posting about the evening on social media. Short video clips of her playing began circulating online. Within hours, messages started appearing on the hotel's page asking about the mysterious pianist from the audience. Neither she nor the famous pianist noticed at first. They were still speaking quietly near the stage. He asked her about the piece she had composed. She explained that it was inspired by her childhood. The sound of rain against windows, quiet evenings, and memories of her mother humming in the kitchen. She had never written the music down formally. She simply remembered it. That makes it even more special, he said. You carry it inside you. The host eventually announced that the evening would continue with light refreshments and conversation. The official performance schedule had clearly changed, but no one seemed disappointed. If anything, the atmosphere felt more alive. Guests approached the famous pianist as well, but instead of asking about his upcoming concerts, many asked about her. Did you know she could play like that? Someone asked him. He answered honestly, no, and that is the point. As the crowd slowly thinned later in the night, she found herself back near the piano, but this time not hiding beside a pillar. She stood confidently, looking at the instrument that had changed her evening. The famous pianist joined her again. You should sit, he said gently. She laughed softly. I have played enough for one night. Music is not measured in minutes, he replied. She sat once more, but this time there was no pressure. No crowd demanding perfection. Just a quiet corner of the ballroom and a few remaining listeners who lingered out of pure interest. He pulled up a second chair nearby. May I? He asked. She nodded. He placed his hands on the keys beside hers. They began playing together, slowly at first, testing each other's rhythm. It was not a competition. It was conversation. Their melodies blended naturally. Where one softened, the other strengthened. Where one paused, the other filled the space. The sound was different from earlier performances. It was collaborative, balanced. The small group of remaining guests watched in quiet admiration. They could see that something meaningful was happening, not just musically but personally. When they finally stopped, both were smiling. You see, he said lightly, music connects people. She nodded. It always has. Outside, the night air was cool as guests began leaving the hotel. But inside, the impact of the evening remained warm. Before she prepared to go home, the manager approached her one last time. We will contact you tomorrow, he said. If you are willing. I will think about it, she replied. As she walked toward the exit, she passed the cafe where she had worked earlier that day. The chairs were stacked neatly. The lights were dimmed. It looked exactly the same as always. But she felt different. She stepped outside into the quiet street. The city lights reflected on the pavement. She paused for a moment, letting the cool air clear her thoughts. Hours earlier, she had been invisible in the crowd. Now doors were opening. Across the street, inside the hotel, the famous pianist stood near the window watching her leave. He felt grateful that the prank he intended had turned into something honest. Something that reminded him of why he loved music in the first place. He understood that the evening would not be remembered for his performance alone. It would be remembered for the moment expectations were broken, and for the simple woman who proved that talent does not need permission to exist. The next morning did not feel ordinary. She woke up before her alarm, staring at the ceiling for a long moment, wondering if the night before had truly happened. The memory of the ballroom lights and the sound of applause still felt fresh in her mind. For years, her mornings had followed the same routine: quick breakfast, simple clothes, early shift at the cafe. But today, something felt different inside her. She reached for her phone, not expecting much. There were dozens of notifications, messages from coworkers, missed calls from friends she had not spoken to in months, even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her heart began to race as she opened social media. Short video clips of her playing at the hotel had spread overnight. Someone had captured the moment when the room fell silent after her first piece. Another clip showed her second performance, the one she had composed herself. The comments were filled with surprise and admiration. Who is she? Why have we never heard of her before? That emotion is real. She felt overwhelmed. She had never been someone who sought attention. Her music had always been private, personal. Seeing it shared publicly felt strange. But it also felt validating. When she arrived at the cafe, the atmosphere was completely different from usual. Her coworkers greeted her with excitement. "You didn't tell us you were hiding that talent," one of them said, half laughing, half amazed. She smiled shyly. "I wasn't hiding," she replied. "I just never had the chance." Even regular customers approached her. One elderly man who often sat near the window shook her hand gently. "I saw the video," he said. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music when I was young." His words meant more to her than the online praise. Later that afternoon, the hotel manager called. He spoke warmly, explaining that interest in the hotel's music nights had suddenly increased. People were asking when she would perform again. He officially invited her to play the following weekend as a featured performer. Featured. The word felt heavy. She asked for a little time to think, even though her heart already knew the answer. After work, she walked slowly through the city streets instead of taking the bus home. She needed space to think. Cars passed by, people hurried along sidewalks, but her mind was focused on one question. Was she ready? For years, music had been her comfort. It had never been a career plan. It was something she turned to when life felt heavy. Accepting the offer would mean stepping into a new world, one filled with expectations. That evening, the famous pianist called her. She was surprised to see his name on her screen. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said politely. "Not at all," she replied. "I wanted to check on you," he continued. "Last night was a lot." She laughed softly. "That is an understatement." He told her that the videos had reached even some of his professional contacts. A few respected musicians had mentioned her performance to him. Not as gossip, as genuine curiosity. "You have something rare," he said seriously. "Technical skill can be trained, but sincerity cannot." She listened quietly. "I also heard about the hotel's offer," he added. "I hope you accept." "I'm thinking about it," she admitted. "What worries you?" he asked gently. She paused before answering. "What if last night was just one good moment? What if I cannot repeat it?" There was silence on the other end for a second. "Last night was not luck," he said finally. "It was years of quiet preparation. You have already done the hard work." His words settled her fears slightly. Before ending the call, he offered something unexpected. "I will be in town for a few more days," he said. "If you want, we can rehearse together. Not as teacher and student. As musicians." She felt grateful for the support. The next afternoon, she returned to the hotel ballroom during quiet hours. The grand piano stood alone under soft lighting. The space felt less intimidating without a crowd. He was already there, waiting. They began slowly, reviewing pieces she felt comfortable with. He observed her posture, her timing, her transitions. But instead of criticizing, he offered small suggestions in a respectful tone. "Hold that pause a little longer," he advised at one point. "Let the audience breathe with you." She tried again. The difference was clear. "See," he smiled. "You already understand the music. I'm only helping you shape it." Hours passed quickly. They practiced both classical pieces and her original composition. Each time she played her own work, he listened carefully. "You should write this down properly," he suggested. "Your piece deserves to live beyond memory." She had never thought of it that way. During a short break, they sat quietly near the piano. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course. Why did you really invite me to play that night?" He exhaled slowly. "At first, pride," he admitted. "I thought it would be entertaining." She appreciated his honesty. "But when you started playing," he continued, "I realized how quickly we judge people. It was a lesson I needed." She looked at him thoughtfully. Maybe we both needed it. By the end of rehearsal, she felt stronger. Not perfect, but ready. That night, she called the hotel manager back. "I would like to accept," she said. The manager sounded pleased. He explained that the event would be promoted properly this time. Posters, online announcements, a clear schedule. Her name would be included. Hearing that made everything feel real. Over the next few days, excitement around the upcoming performance grew. The cafe displayed a small sign near the counter announcing her appearance. Customers began asking about ticket details. At home, she practiced more intensely than she had in years. Not out of fear, out of dedication. Her fingers sometimes grew tired, but she welcomed the feeling. It reminded her of childhood evenings spent at the old piano. One night, while practicing her original piece, she stopped halfway. She closed her eyes and listened to the silence in the room. For the first time, she understood something clearly. This was not about proving anyone wrong. Not about the prank. Not even about the famous pianist. It was about reclaiming a part of herself she had set aside. The weekend arrived quickly. Outside the hotel, more people gathered than usual for a music night. Some had seen the viral clips. Others were simply curious. Inside, the grand piano waited once again under the chandeliers. But this time, she would not be stepping forward as an unexpected guest. She would walk out as the main performer. And somewhere in the audience, the famous pianist would be watching. Not as the star of the evening, but as someone ready to applaud. The night of the official performance arrived with a quiet kind of excitement. The hotel ballroom looked similar to the previous week, with the same glowing chandeliers and polished floors. But the feeling in the air was different. There was anticipation now. Not curiosity about a joke. Not whispers about a surprise. This time, people had come with intention. Outside the entrance, a small sign displayed her name as the featured pianist for the evening. She stood backstage for a moment, looking at it. Seeing her name printed there felt unreal. Just days ago, she had been standing near a pillar, unnoticed. Now, guests were arriving because of her. Her hands felt slightly cold, but her heart was steady. The famous pianist was already seated in the audience. He had chosen a simple seat among the guests instead of staying near the stage. He did not want the attention. Tonight belonged to her. The host stepped forward and welcomed everyone. He spoke about unexpected talent, about how music can appear in places we least expect. Then he invited her to the stage. The applause began immediately. She walked calmly toward the piano. Each step felt strong, not heavy like before. She no longer felt like someone who had wandered into the wrong room. She felt like she belonged there. When she reached the grand piano, she paused for a brief second and looked out at the audience. The lights were bright, but she could still see faces. Some were familiar from the cafe. Some were strangers. All were waiting. She sat down and placed her hands gently on the keys. There was no teasing invitation this time. No prank. Only silence and respect. She began with a classical piece that required both control and emotion. The first notes flowed smoothly into the hall. Her fingers moved with confidence that came from years of quiet practice. She allowed herself to feel every note, not rushing, not forcing anything. The audience listened carefully. They noticed the strength in her posture, the calm expression on her face. She was not trying to impress anyone. She was simply sharing what she loved. As the piece built into its more powerful sections, the sound filled the room completely. The music rose toward the high ceiling and seemed to settle gently back down over the crowd. It felt alive. The famous pianist watched closely. He could see the difference from the previous week. She was more relaxed, more open. The nervous energy had transformed into confidence. When she finished the first piece, applause filled the ballroom, but she did not stand. She nodded softly in appreciation and prepared for the next part of the evening. "This next piece," she said into the microphone gently, "is one I wrote myself." A quiet excitement moved through the audience. She began her original composition. The melody started softly, just like before. But tonight, it carried even more depth, felt fuller. She allowed small pauses where the emotion could breathe. The rhythm felt natural, like a conversation. As she played, images from her life seemed to pass through the music. Childhood evenings near the old piano, long days at work, quiet nights practicing alone. The sound carried both struggle and hope. Some guests closed their eyes. Others leaned forward slightly. A few wiped tears quietly, moved by something they could not fully explain. Midway through the piece, she added a new section she had written during the week. It was brighter, lighter. It reflected the change she had felt inside herself since that unexpected night. The famous pianist noticed the addition immediately. He smiled to himself. Growth. That was what he was hearing. The music gradually rose toward its final movement. Her hands moved faster, but with steady control. There was power now, but also peace. When the final note rang out, it lingered gently in the air before fading. For a second, the room stayed silent again. But this silence was not shock. It was admiration. Then the applause came, stronger than before. Many people stood to their feet. The sound echoed through the ballroom, warm and genuine. She stood slowly and bowed her head in gratitude. Her eyes searched the crowd briefly and found the famous pianist. He was standing too, clapping with a quiet smile. After the applause settled, the host returned to the stage. "Tonight," he said, "we witnessed something special. Not just talent, but courage." She listened, feeling emotion rise in her chest. The host then invited the famous pianist to say a few words. There was light laughter in the room, but also curiosity. He walked to the stage calmly and took the microphone. "A week ago," he began, "I thought I was giving the audience a playful moment. Instead, I received a lesson." The room grew quiet. "I learned that talent does not need a spotlight to exist. It only needs a chance." He turned toward her. "And tonight proves that when we give that chance, something beautiful can happen." The applause returned briefly. He stepped back, letting the focus return to her. As the evening continued, guests approached her not just with praise, but with respect. A local music teacher offered to help her write down her compositions properly. A small event organizer asked about future performances. Even a community center representative invited her to perform for young students who were learning music. Each conversation felt meaningful. Later, when most of the crowd had left and the ballroom grew quiet again, she remained near the piano. The famous pianist joined her once more. "You did not just perform," he said. "You owned the stage." She smiled softly. "I felt different tonight." "You were different," he replied. "You believed in yourself." She looked at the piano keys gently. "For a long time," she said slowly, "I thought my love for music was something I had to leave behind. I convinced myself it was only a hobby." He nodded. "But now I see that some dreams do not disappear," she continued. "They wait." He smiled. "And when they return, they are stronger." She laughed quietly, feeling lighter than she had in years. Outside, the night air felt calm as she finally stepped out of the hotel once more. But this time, she did not walk away feeling uncertain. She walked with purpose. The prank that was meant to create laughter had turned into something else entirely. It had opened a door, not only for her career, but for her confidence. And for everyone who witnessed it, the lesson remains simple. Never assume, never underestimate, and never ignore the quiet person in the room. Because sometimes, the greatest music comes from the place no one thought to look.